The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of the Vatican as Captain Marco Benedetti adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. The red, blue, and yellow stripes of his Swiss Guard attire had been pressed to perfection, his silver helmet polished until it gleamed like a mirror. After 23 years of faithful service protecting the Holy Father, Marco had seen many changes within these ancient walls. But nothing had prepared him for what Pope Francis would do on this particular Tuesday morning. The call had come unexpectedly, from Cardinal Parolин's office just after dawn. "His Holiness wishes to visit the barracks," the secretary had said, his voice carrying a note of surprise that matched Marco's own confusion. In all his years of service, no pope had ever made such a request. The Swiss Guard quarters were functional, simple spaces where the soldiers lived, trained, and prepared for their duties. They were not places designed for papal visits. Marco quickly assembled his men in the main corridor of their residence. 24 guards stood at attention, their faces showing the same bewilderment that he felt. Lieutenant Hans Müller, a young man from Zurich who had joined the guard only 6 months earlier, shifted nervously in his boots. Sergeant Giuseppe Rossi, a veteran like Marco, maintained his professional composure, but his eyes betrayed his curiosity. "Men," Marco addressed his unit, his voice echoing off the stone walls, "His Holiness Pope Francis will be visiting us today. I don't know why, and I don't know what to expect, but we will receive him with the honor and dignity our service demands." The guards nodded in unison, but questions lingered in their expressions. The sound of approaching footsteps on the ancient stones announced the Pope's arrival before anyone saw him. Cardinal Parolin appeared first, followed by 2 Vatican security officers, and then Pope Francis himself. The Holy Father wore his simple white cassock and white zucchetto, his face bearing the gentle smile that had become familiar to millions around the world. What struck Marco immediately was how the Pope seemed to fill the modest corridor with his presence, not through grandeur or ceremony, but through something far more profound. His eyes moved from guard to guard, meeting each man's gaze with genuine warmth and interest. This was not a formal inspection or a ceremonial duty. This felt personal, intimate, as if the Pope had come to visit old friends rather than perform an official function. "Good morning, my brave defenders," Pope Francis said, his Argentine accent softening the Italian words. "I hope you don't mind, Anne. Old man dropping by your home unannounced?" The formality that had gripped the guards began to dissolve as several of them smiled despite their training to remain stoic during official encounters. Marco stepped forward to welcome the Holy Father, but Pope Francis raised a hand gently. "Please, Captain, don't let me interrupt your morning routine. I simply wanted to see where you live, where you prepare yourselves each day to serve God and protect His Church." The Pope's eyes took in simple furnishings of the corridor. The religious pictures on the walls, the worn but well-maintained equipment displays. Lieutenant Müller, despite his nervousness, found himself studying the Pope's face. The young guard had expected someone more distant, more formal. Instead, he saw a man whose eyes crinkled with genuine joy, whose weathered hands spoke of a life lived among people rather than isolated in palaces. The Pope noticed his attention and walked directly to him. "You're new here," Pope Francis observed, not as a question, but as a statement of recognition. "How are you finding your service, my son?" Muller's throat felt dry, but he managed to respond that it was an honor to serve. The Pope nodded thoughtfully, then placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "The honor is ours, Lieutenant. Never forget that." As Pope Francis moved through the guards' living quarters, something remarkable began to happen. The initial tension that had filled the corridor started to melt away, replaced by something warmer and more human. The Holy Father paused at each door, asking simple questions about the men's lives, their families, their homes far away from Rome. Sergeant Rossi found himself telling the Pope about his wife and 3 children back in Milan, how difficult it was to be away from them for months at a time. Pope Francis listened with complete attention, nodding thoughtfully. "Your sacrifice allows others to feel safe," the Pope said quietly. "Your family shares in that noble service, Giuseppe. They give up their husband and father so that the Church can be protected." The words touched something deep in the veteran sergeant's heart. For years he had carried guilt about the time away from his family, wondering if his service was worth the cost. But hearing the Pope acknowledge not just his sacrifice, but his family's sacrifice as well, Giuseppe felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying, in the small common room where the guards gathered for meals and relaxation. Pope Francis noticed a chess set on a wooden table. The pieces were old and worn, clearly well used. "Who plays?" he asked with evident interest. Several hands went up, but it was Private Antonio Ferreira from Naples who stepped forward. "I learned from my grandfather, Your Holiness," Antonio said shyly. "We play every evening after our duties." Pope Francis's eyes lit up with delight. "My father taught me when I was a boy in Buenos Aires," he replied. "Perhaps we could play a quick game?" What followed was perhaps the most unusual scene in the history of the Swiss Guard. The Pope of the Catholic Church, leader of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide, sat at a simple wooden table in the Guard's common room, contemplating his next move in a chess match with a 24-year-old private from southern Italy. The other guards gathered around, initially maintaining their formal positions, but gradually relaxing as the Pope's infectious joy filled the room. He made jokes about his chess skills, laughed at his mistakes, and praised Antonio's clever moves. When the young guard checkmated him in 12 moves, Pope Francis clapped his hands together with genuine appreciation. "Excellent," he exclaimed. "Your grandfather taught you well, Antonio. Chess teaches us patience, strategy, and the importance of thinking several moves ahead. These are good qualities for a guard, but even better qualities for a man of faith. The profound lesson hidden within the simple game was not lost on any of the men present as they moved through different areas of the living quarters. Pope Francis asked about their training, their daily routines, their hopes and fears. He wanted to see their sleeping quarters, simple rooms with single beds, wooden dressers, and small windows that looked out onto the Vatican gardens. He examined their weapons and equipment with the interest of someone who understood the seriousness of their responsibilities. But it was in the small chapel where the guards held their private prayers that Pope Francis paused the longest. The room was modest, with wooden pews that could seat perhaps 30 people, a simple altar, and a crucifix that had been blessed by Pope John Paul II decades earlier. The Holy Father knelt before the altar and remained in silent prayer for several minutes while the guards stood quietly behind him. When he arose, his eyes were bright with emotion. "This is where you find your strength," he said to them. "Not in your weapons or your training, but here, in your relationship with Christ. You are not just guards of the Vatican, you are guardians of faith itself." The visit continued into the guards' training facility, a modest gymnasium where the men maintained their physical fitness and practiced their ceremonial duties. Pope Francis watched with keen interest as several guards demonstrated their drill routines, the precise movements they had perfected through countless hours of practice. "Beautiful," he murmured, as the guards performed their traditional march, like a dance of dedication. Then, unexpectedly, he asked if he could try holding one of their ceremonial halberds, the long spear-like weapons that were both symbolic and functional tools of their office. Captain Marco hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was appropriate, but the Pope's encouraging smile convinced him. The Holy Father took the ancient weapon in his hands, feeling its weight and balance. "Heavy," he observed with a chuckle. "My respect for your strength has grown even more." But it was what happened next that truly surprised everyone present. Pope Francis asked about the newest recruit in their unit, a young man named Stefan from a small village in Switzerland who had arrived just 2 weeks earlier. Stefan was struggling with homesickness and had been having difficulty adjusting to life in Rome. The Pope asked to speak with Stefan privately. They walked to a quiet corner of the training room where they could speak without being overheard. For 20 minutes, the leader of the Catholic Church sat with this lonely young man, listening to his fears and doubts, offering comfort and wisdom born from his own experiences of being far from home. "When I first came to Rome as Archbishop," Pope Francis told Stefan, "I felt lost in these ancient corridors. Everything seemed too grand, too important for a simple priest from Argentina. But then I realized that God doesn't call us to places where we already feel comfortable. He calls us to places where we must grow." The conversation transformed Stefan's entire demeanor. The young man who had been withdrawn and uncertain stood straighter, his eyes brighter with renewed purpose. The other guards witnessed this transformation and understood they were seeing something rare and precious, a shepherd truly caring for one of his flock. As the morning progressed, Pope Francis asked to see where the guards took their meals. The simple dining hall, with its long wooden tables and basic chairs, became the setting for another unexpected moment. The Pope asked if he could join them for their midday meal, a request that sent the kitchen staff into a flurry of activity. But Pope Francis insisted on simplicity. "Whatever you normally eat is perfect for me," he said firmly. And so the Pope shared a meal of simple pasta, bread, and salad with the Swiss guards. Blessing the food and asking each man to share something about his life at home, the stories that emerged painted pictures of ordinary young men from across Europe who had chosen extraordinary service. There was Klaus from Austria, whose father had also served in the Swiss Guard 40 years earlier. There was Francois from France, who had given up a promising career in engineering to answer what he felt was a calling to serve the church. There was Paolo from Italy, who came from a family of police officers and felt that protecting the Pope was the highest form of law. Enforcement. Each story received Pope Francis's complete attention. He asked follow-up questions, made connections between their experiences and his own, and offered insights that showed his deep understanding of the human heart. The formal distance between the Holy Father and his protectors dissolved completely during that meal. After lunch, Pope Francis asked to see the communications center where the guards coordinated their security operations. The technology impressed him, but what impressed him more was the dedication and professionalism of the men who operated it. He listened intently as they explained their procedures, their protocols, and their constant vigilance. "You see everything but remain invisible," he observed. "You know all our movements but respect our privacy. This requires not just skill, but great character." The guards in the communications center stood a little taller after receiving this recognition of their often overlooked contributions. As the afternoon sun began to slant through the windows of the guard quarters, Pope Francis made an announcement that surprised everyone present. "I would like to hear about your challenges," he said simply. "Not your official duties, but the personal struggles you face while serving here." The request created a moment of uncertain silence. Swiss guards were trained to project strength and reliability, not to discuss their vulnerabilities with the Holy Father. But Pope Francis's gentle persistence and obvious, sincere interest gradually encouraged several men to speak. Private Martinez from Spain spoke about missing his younger sister's wedding because of his service rotation. Corporal Weber from Germany mentioned the difficulty of maintaining relationships back home when his life was so completely dedicated to his duties in Rome. Several guards talked about the financial challenges their families faced while they served for modest pay in one of the world's most expensive cities. Pope Francis listened to each concern without judgment, often nodding with recognition. When they finished sharing, he was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Your sacrifices are not invisible to God," he said finally, "and they should not be invisible to the church that you serve so faithfully." Then the Pope did something that no one expected. He began to share his own struggles with his position, speaking with remarkable candor about the loneliness of leadership, the weight of making decisions that affected millions of people, and his own moments of doubt and fear. "Sometimes I lie awake at night," he admitted, "wondering if I am wise enough, strong enough, holy enough for this responsibility. But then I remember that God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called." The same is true for each of you. This vulnerability from the Pope created a profound sense of connection among everyone present. Here was the most powerful religious leader in the world, admitting his own humanity, his own need for God's grace and guidance. The guards saw him not just as the Holy Father, but as a fellow traveler on the journey of faith. The conversation turned to their spiritual lives. And Pope Francis asked each guard to share what helped them maintain their faith while living in the unique environment of the Vatican. Some spoke about their daily prayers, others about letters from home, still others about the small moments of beauty they found in their service. Sergeant Hoffman from Germany mentioned that he found God most clearly in the early morning hours when he stood guard in St. Peter's Square, watching the sunrise illuminate the magnificent basilica. "Those quiet moments remind me why I'm here," he said. Pope Francis nodded with deep understanding. "Beauty is one of God's greatest gifts to us," the Pope replied. "He could have made a world that was merely functional, but instead he chose to make it beautiful. Your appreciation of that beauty shows a heart that is truly alive to his presence." The Pope then asked about their family's understanding of their service. This question revealed some of the deepest challenges the guards faced. Many struggled to explain to loved ones back home why they had chosen to dedicate years of their lives to protecting someone they had never met, in service of a cause that sometimes seemed abstract or distant. Lieutenant Fischer from Austria spoke about his parents' confusion over his decision to join the Swiss Guard instead of pursuing the law degree they had hoped he would complete. "They love me, but they don't understand why I chose this path," he said with evident pain. Pope Francis stood and placed his hands on the young man's shoulders. "Sometimes the people who love us most have the hardest time understanding God's call on our lives," he said gently. "This doesn't mean they love us less or that our calling is wrong. It means that God's plans are sometimes mysterious, even to those closest to us." The Pope shared a story from his own life about his mother's reaction when he first felt called to the priesthood. She wanted grandchildren, a normal life for her son. "It took time for her to see that serving God was not taking me away from family, but expanding my family to include all of God's children." These personal revelations created an atmosphere of trust and openness that surprised everyone present. The formal protocol that usually governed any interaction with the Pope had been replaced by something much more precious: authentic human connection. As the day progressed, toward evening, Pope Francis asked to visit the guard's personal quarters one more time. But this time, he wanted to see something specific: the photographs, letters, and personal items that connected them to their lives outside the Vatican walls. In room after room, the Pope examined family photographs with genuine interest, asking about siblings, parents, grandparents. He listened to stories about home villages in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, about family traditions and childhood memories that shaped these young men long before they ever dreamed of. Serving in Rome, in Private Bauer's room, the Pope paused at a photograph of an elderly woman in traditional Swiss clothing. "My grandmother," Bauer explained. "She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Pope Francis held the photograph gently. Studying the woman's kind face, "She has the eyes of someone who knew great sorrow but chose love anyway," the Pope observed. "You carry her strength with you, don't you?" Bauer nodded, emotion evident in his voice as he confirmed that his grandmother's example of faith through hardship had inspired his own spiritual journey. The Pope spent several minutes in each room, treating these spaces not as simple dormitories but as windows into the souls of the men who had dedicated their lives to service. He blessed photographs, read excerpts from letters home, and listened to stories that revealed the depth of sacrifice these guards made daily in the room shared by two guards from different countries. Pope Francis noticed something beautiful: a small altar they had created together. Combining religious items from their different traditions and cultures, a Swiss wooden cross stood next to an Austrian prayer book, while Italian rosary beads lay beside. German religious medals. "This is what the Church should be," the Pope said with evident emotion. "Different nations, different cultures, united in faith and service. You have created something here that shows the world what is possible when we choose unity over division." The two guards, who had initially been nervous about the Pope seeing their modest living space, now stood with obvious pride in what they had accomplished together. Their simple room had become a symbol of international cooperation and shared faith. As the sun began to set, Pope Francis gathered all the guards in their main assembly hall. The room was filled with an atmosphere of expectation. As everyone sensed that this remarkable day was building towards something significant, the Pope stood before them. No longer the formal religious leader making an official visit, but a father figure who had spent the day truly getting to know his spiritual sons. His face showed the joy and satisfaction of someone who had discovered something precious and said, unexpected. "Today has been a gift to me," he began, his voice carrying deep emotion. "I came here thinking I was visiting you, but I discovered that you have been visiting me. Through your stories, your faith, your dedication. You have shown me something beautiful about what it means to serve God." He paused, looking around the room at faces that had become familiar and dear to him over the course of the day. "You are not just guards of buildings or protectors of persons. You are guardians of something much more precious. The possibility that ordinary people can live extraordinary lives of service." The Pope spoke about each guard by name, recalling specific conversations and moments from the day that had touched him. He remembered Muller's nervousness and growth, Rossi's sacrifice for his family, Stefan's homesickness and renewal, Martinez's missed wedding, and dozens of other personal details that showed how completely present he had been throughout the day. But now, Pope Francis said, his tone becoming more serious, "I must tell you something important. Something I have never told anyone before, because until today, I wasn't certain it was true." The room fell completely silent. Even Cardinal Parolin, who had been observing quietly throughout the day, leaned forward with intense attention. Whatever the Pope was about to reveal, everyone sensed it would be significant beyond anything they could imagine. Pope Francis stood in the gathering twilight of the Assembly Hall, surrounded by the 24 Swiss guards who had become so much more than protectors, went to him over the course of this extraordinary day. The silence was complete, broken only by the distant sound of evening bells from St. Peter's Basilica. "When I was elected Pope," he began, his voice carrying a weight that made every man in the room lean forward, "I was terrified. Not of the responsibility, not of the public attention, but of something much more personal. I was afraid that in becoming the Holy Father to millions, I would lose the ability to be a true father to anyone." He paused, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes moving from face to face in the room. "The papacy can be a very lonely position. People speak to you with such reverence, such careful words, that sometimes you wonder if anyone sees the man beneath the white cassock. You begin to question whether your relationships are genuine or simply products of your office. Captain." Marco felt his breath catch in his throat. In all his years of service, he had never heard any pope speak with such raw honesty about the personal cost of their sacred office. "Today," Pope Francis continued, "you have given me something I thought I might never have again. The experience of being simply Francis, not Pope Francis. You shared your chess games, your homesickness, your doubts, your dreams. You let me see your humanity, and in doing so, you allowed me to remember mine." The emotion in his voice was unmistakable now. Several of the younger guards felt tears beginning to form in their eyes, moved by this unexpected vulnerability from the most powerful religious leader in the world. "But there's something else," the Pope said, and now his voice carried a different quality. Something that made everyone in the room stand a little straighter. Something I have never shared with anyone, because until today, I wasn't certain it was true. He walked to the window that looked out over the Vatican gardens, now bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. For a long moment, he was silent, as if gathering courage for what he was about to reveal. "3 months ago," he said finally, turning back to face the guards, "I received some difficult news from my doctors. The kind of news that makes a man think about time, about legacy, about what truly matters in the years he has remaining." The silence in the room became even more profound. Cardinal Parolin's face showed surprise and concern, indicating that this was news to him as well. "I'm not sharing this to alarm you or to seek sympathy," Pope Francis continued quickly, seeing the worry in their faces. "I'm sharing it because it led me to a decision that brought me to you today. I realize that if my time is limited, I want to spend it doing what Christ did, walking among people, knowing them as individuals, loving them as a father loves his children." He smiled then, and the warmth of that smile seemed to fill the entire room. "Today you have shown me that it's still possible, that even a pope can have sons, not just subjects. That even the Holy Father can be simply a father." Lieutenant Mueller, the young guard who had been so nervous that morning, found himself stepping forward. "Your Holiness," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "you have been a father to us long before today. Every time you bless us before we begin our duties, every time you remember our names, every prayer you say for our safety, these are the actions of a father. One by one, the other guards began to speak, sharing how Pope Francis had touched their lives through small gestures and moments of kindness they thought he might not even remember. They spoke of birthday wishes, inquiries about sick family members, encouragement during difficult times. Pope Francis listened with growing amazement and joy, realizing that the fatherhood he thought he had lost to his papal office had actually been present all along, expressed in ways he hadn't fully recognized when the last guard had spoken. Pope Francis raised his hands in blessing over the assembled men. But instead of the formal papal benediction they expected, he spoke words that came directly from his heart. "My dear sons," he said, and his voice carried all the love and tenderness of a father addressing his beloved children. "May you always remember that your service here is not just about protecting buildings or even protecting a pope. You are protecting hope itself. You are guardians of the possibility that love can triumph over fear, that faith can overcome doubt, that ordinary people can choose extraordinary goodness." He paused, looking once more at each face, memorizing these moments. "And may you always remember that you are loved, not just for your service, but for who you are as men of God, sons of the Church, and my own dear spiritual sons." The blessing that followed was unlike any the guards had ever experienced. It seemed to carry not just the authority of papal office, but the deep, personal love of a father for his children. As Pope Francis prepared to leave, he turned back one final time. The last words he spoke were simple, but they would be remembered by every man present for the rest of their lives. When people ask you what it means to serve the Church, tell them this: it means being part of a family where everyone is loved exactly as they are, where service is joy, and where a father's love makes everything possible. With those words, Pope Francis walked slowly out of the assembly hall, leaving behind 24 young men whose lives had been forever changed, and carrying with him the renewed certainty that being Pope had not cost him his capacity for fatherhood, but had actually expanded it to embrace spiritual sons from around the world. Asterisk.